For centuries, Rome survived disasters that would have destroyed almost any other state. Its armies were annihilated, its cities were invaded, and its emperors were murdered, yet the empire always found the men, money, and determination to rebuild. Then, slowly, that ability disappeared. Rome's enemies did not create this weakness. They merely exploited it. Long before the Western Empire collapsed, the Romans had already begun dismantling the political, economic, military, and social foundations that once made their state almost impossible to destroy. The first crack in Rome's foundations was political. The empire had no reliable system for choosing its next ruler. An emperor could name an heir, the Senate could approve a candidate, and bloodline could help, but in the end, the throne belonged to whoever controlled the strongest army. This turned imperial succession into a military competition. When an emperor died, generals did not wait for a peaceful transfer of power. They declared themselves emperor, promised higher pay to their soldiers, and marched against their rivals. Legions that had been raised to defend the Rhine, the Danube, or the eastern frontier were pulled away to fight other Roman legions. Rome had faced civil wars before. But during the 3rd century, they became almost permanent. Emperors rose and fell with extraordinary speed. Many were murdered by their own soldiers, defeated by rival commanders, or killed before they had ruled long enough to stabilize the state. Every struggle for the throne weakened the empire twice. First, Roman armies destroyed one another in battle. Trained soldiers, experienced officers, equipment, and money disappeared without defeating a single external enemy. Second, the frontiers were left exposed. While Roman generals fought over who would rule the empire, Germanic groups crossed the Rhine and Danube, and Persian armies attacked in the east. Even victory did not solve the problem. A successful general had now shown every other commander that imperial power could be taken by force. The man who saved the empire today could become the next rebel tomorrow. This also made emperors suspicious of their own best commanders. A general who won too many battles, became too popular, or gained the loyalty of too many troops could appear more dangerous than the enemy beyond the frontier. Rome had built the most powerful military machine in the ancient world. Then it repeatedly turned that machine against itself. Civil wars did not only destroy armies. They also destroyed the system that paid for them. Every new emperor needed money immediately. Soldiers expected bonuses, rival armies had to be defeated, damaged frontiers had to be rebuilt, and political supporters had to be rewarded. When the treasury could not provide enough, emperors weakened the currency by reducing the amount of precious metal in Roman coins. More coins could now be produced, but each of them was worth less. Prices rose, confidence declined, and collecting taxes became increasingly difficult. The government responded by demanding more from those who still had something left to give. Farmers were taxed more heavily. Cities were forced to supply soldiers, food, animals, and equipment. Local officials became personally responsible for collecting what the state demanded, even when their communities could no longer afford it. This created another destructive cycle. Higher taxes pushed small landowners into debt. Some abandoned their farms. Others placed themselves under the protection of powerful landowners who were better able to avoid state obligations. The empire still appeared enormous on a map, but the government's real tax base was shrinking. At the same time, the cost of defending the West remained immense. Rome had to maintain roads, fortifications, officials, fleets, and armies across thousands of kilometers of frontier. And every lost province made the problem worse. Lost territory meant fewer taxpayers. Fewer taxpayers meant fewer soldiers. Fewer soldiers made it harder to recover the territory that had been lost. The capture of North Africa by the Vandals was especially devastating. The Western Empire lost one of its richest regions, along with vital tax revenue and grain supplies. Rome had once grown powerful by conquering new lands. Now, every piece of land it lost made the next loss more likely. The empire was not simply becoming poorer. It was losing the ability to pay for its own survival. As the empire weakened, Rome's ruling class did not disappear with it. In many cases, the richest families remained wealthy even while the state around them was becoming poorer. This was one of the most dangerous changes of the late empire. The interests of the state and the interests of its elite were no longer the same. Large landowners had influence, private networks, and legal privileges that ordinary people did not. They could resist tax collectors, negotiate special treatment, or shift part of the burden onto smaller farmers and urban communities. The government still needed money, but the people most capable of paying often had the greatest ability to avoid payment. Meanwhile, political life became increasingly centered on the imperial court. Positions, titles, and access to the emperor could be more valuable than effective administration. Powerful families competed for influence, while officials protected their careers and personal alliances. Even military success could become dangerous. A general who defended the frontier, won the loyalty of his troops, or became too popular might be seen not as a savior, but as a future usurper. Some of Rome's most capable commanders were removed or killed by the very rulers they had protected. The result was a system that punished competence and rewarded caution, loyalty, and intrigue. Local elites also began to think locally. If the imperial government could no longer guarantee security, a wealthy landowner had little reason to sacrifice everything for a distant court. It was often safer to protect his estate, make an agreement with a regional commander, or cooperate with whatever new power controlled the area. This did not mean that every senator or landowner consciously wanted Rome to collapse. It meant that preserving private wealth and local influence became more practical than preserving the empire itself. Rome's elite did not simply abandon the state. They learned how to survive without it. The Roman army did not suddenly forget how to fight. Late Roman soldiers could still defeat invading armies, defend fortified cities, and conduct complex campaigns. The real problem was that the empire was gradually losing control over the military power on which its survival depended. Civil wars had already destroyed thousands of experienced soldiers. Economic decline made replacements harder to recruit, equip, and pay. As the tax base contracted, the government struggled to maintain enough troops across the enormous western frontier. Rome increasingly filled these gaps by recruiting soldiers from beyond its borders and making agreements with entire foreign groups. This was not automatically a disaster. Non-Romans had served in the imperial army for centuries, and many became loyal and highly effective commanders. The danger appeared when the state could no longer absorb these soldiers into a stable military system. Some allied forces remained under their own leaders. They fought for Rome in exchange for money, food, land, or political recognition. Their loyalty depended less on the empire itself and more on whether the government could continue providing what it had promised. At the same time, Roman troops were becoming increasingly attached to individual commanders. A general who controlled the army could influence the imperial court, remove an emperor, or place a new one on the throne. The army was no longer simply defending the state. It was becoming one of the main prizes in the struggle to control what remained of it. As central authority weakened, military power became more regional and personal. Local commanders defended particular territories, negotiated with invading groups, and made decisions without waiting for approval from the imperial government. Rome still possessed soldiers. It still possessed generals. It could still win battles. But victory in one region no longer guaranteed the survival of the wider empire. The Roman army had once united distant provinces under a single authority. By the 5th century, its fragments were helping divide them. While Rome's political, economic, and military structures were weakening, Roman society itself was also changing. For centuries, Roman identity had been closely connected to the city, the army, public office, and loyalty to the empire. Local elites funded temples, baths, festivals, and public buildings because status came from serving the civic community. By late antiquity, many of these institutions were losing influence. Cities remained important, but local councils became weaker, public offices became financial burdens, and wealthy families increasingly invested in private estates, personal networks, and religious institutions instead of traditional civic life. At the same time, Christianity created a new source of identity and authority that was not entirely dependent on the imperial state. Bishops organized charity, negotiated with military leaders, represented local populations, and sometimes defended cities when imperial officials could not. Churches provided food, protection, community, and a sense of continuity during periods of war and political collapse. Christianity did not destroy the Roman Empire. The Eastern Empire was also Christian and survived for centuries. But the spread of Christianity was part of a much larger transformation. For many people, the local bishop, landowner, military commander, or religious community became more immediate than a distant emperor. Loyalty did not disappear, but it became divided between institutions that could continue functioning even when imperial government failed. The old Roman world was therefore not simply destroyed. It was gradually replaced. Roman law, language, religion, and social customs survived, but they were increasingly separated from the political system that had created them. By the time imperial authority disappeared in much of the West, society had already developed new ways to organize power, protection, and identity. The Western Empire did not fall into an empty world. It fell into a world that had already learned how to live without it. Rome was not destroyed by a single invasion, a single emperor, or a single disastrous battle. Its decline was a chain reaction. Civil wars weakened the state. Economic exhaustion reduced its ability to recover. The elite protected private interests instead of public institutions. The army became fragmented and increasingly independent. And Roman society slowly developed new sources of authority and identity outside the imperial system. Foreign enemies accelerated the collapse, but they attacked an empire that had already spent generations dismantling its own foundations. Rome had survived countless defeats because it could always rebuild. The Western Empire finally disappeared when the Romans lost not only the power to rebuild it but also the shared reason to keep it alive.